Hey everyone, this is your co-host Chuck Parson. Just a quick trigger warning. In this episode, we will be discussing forms of childhood sexual abuse and an instance of sexual assault in some amount of detail. There will be another quick trigger warning in the episode before we discuss the sexual assault, which will be towards the end of the episode. As always, thanks for listening, and here we go.
Welcome back to the Life After.
Welcome back to the Life After. Brady, how you feeling over there today?
Oh my God! So I'm on muscle relaxers because I pulled my back last night.
Brady's on muscle relaxers.
Yeah, so I feel like we're just coming back from break from last week. Because my brain.
Brady just woke up in the next room and walked in here.
Rip Van Winkled. Rip Van Winkled.
Yeah, hell yeah.
How are you?
I'm feeling great. I'm a beer and a half in at this point, so that's kind of a muscle relaxer.
Yeah, that's unhealthy.
Stag, the official beer of the Life After.
And poor people. So I've got a question for you, Chuck.
Yeah,
when you were, have I told you how I always picture the beginning of our shows as a puppet show where it's like, hey, Chuck, and then like you answer, and like, because like I have these questions that are so obviously set up that it just feels like a puppet.
Am I an inanimate object to you that you just like shove your hand up my ass and?
Yeah. I'm
basically okay.
You're the Kermit to my Jim Henson.
What do you want me to say, Brady?
So I was thinking, what book, like authors, did you like when you were a Christian? We've brought it up as we go, but like,
well, so many.
So the real reason this is coming up is because I came into your house today where we record, and laying out on your coffee table was a Rob Bell book.
Rob Bell,
and I was like, doing
The Heretic.
What are you doing?
I mean, let's be real. If there's any author that it's like relatively passive for us to read at this point, it's Rob Bell. But
I never really got that deep into him.
No, I know, Brady, because you were. I know. You were just like,
I did like the Numa videos.
You only liked toxic literature.
Yeah, because it made sense. It at least follows the.
Yeah. Okay. So I was skimming the intro to Love Wins, which was probably his most controversial book. For a segment that I'm working on for the show.
Oh, okay.
But you guys will get into it. Actually, I think they will have heard it by then. It was the beginning of the Dave episode where I talk about hell. So,
what other authors stick out to you from those days?
Okay, so the author that, and I've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but like the author that kept me Christian was Donald Miller first. So
Blue Like Jazz.
I was about Blue Like Jazz. I was about to leave. I was almost out in college. I was like 17. I graduated high school, taken this stupid worldviews class at Westminster at my very Presbyterian school, and I got done with this class and I was like, is this really the best apologetic that we have? Like, is that the defense really? And so I was like, that's not very convincing. So I was like about to get out, and then I read Blue Like Jazz, which is just like it's just such a well-written book. Like, I'm not recommending it to our audience or anything, but
in a crew bag or something.
Yeah, it was a Campus Crusade bag, and I read it, and I was like, oh shit, I don't have to be a Republican or a conservative, and I can curse, and I can drink alcohol, and all of that is cool. And Don Miller's, wow, that guy's really cool. And then I got really into him, and I read the rest of his books, and that led to just a rabbit trail after that. What were you reading when you were in college, Brady?
So I was, very reformed, and I was a theology person. So I loved John Piper because
Brady and I used to argue incessantly about Calvinism, by the way.
That bad.
Every time we saw each other, we would at least get one dig in
that is
about
true.
Calvinism and Arminianism. Yeah,
that is true.
Anyway,
we were so young and different, but
we were.
So I really liked him because I liked the logic of everything, and also he does talk a lot about like joy and the emotional side of the beliefs and all of that.
Right.
So I was really attracted to that.
Self-professed Christian hedonist.
Yeah, God, that was like on my
Desiring God, Confessions of a Christian Hedonist. Is that right?
They used to be my religious views on Facebook. I was a
Christian hedonist.
And then
I was transforming was my religious views.
God, it tastes like MySpace.
I need a break. I need to take a break. We'll be right back. I'm just
No,
kidding.
but I was into him for college. I had to read a lot of A.W. Pink. Ugh.
Oh, A.W. Pink.
Yeah.
Wow.
I went through a weird Jonathan
like,
Edwards phase, but that was mostly because of it, like
Sinners in the hands of an angry
because he was basically
God.
like John Piper's grandfather, and I wanted to like read the
We are
whole
but
family
spiders
tree.
dangling by a single
I read that
thread
in my high school.
above the flames of hell. It's so not biblical at all. Like he has no judgment day. It's like hell exists right now, and when you die, you go straight there. You know, it's like such a weird.
That's what
his theology was terrible. Even from a liberal perspective, his theology. Even from a conservative perspective, his theology.
But there's
terrible.
nothing to grade the papers on.
Yeah,
like
true.
how are you supposed to say what theology is?
The Great Awakening.
There's nothing. But anyway, so that's that was kind of the stuff I was into. And then like I liked Mark Driscoll, and then I'm so disgusted by that now.
That's sad. I mean, like
it's really sad. It was sad back then.
In your defense, I mean, there was a point where everybody should have seen it coming, but there was a point where nobody saw it coming. So it's like there's a middle ground, you know. Like I recommend it. As a matter of fact, a friend of a friend was starting a church, and my friend came to me because I worked at a Christian bookstore, and I was like super nerd, and he was like, "What book should he read? Like, what's the one book he should read?" And I recommended Confessions of an Emerging Church Pastor or whatever.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Confessions. And he read it, and he came back to me and was like, "Oh yeah, my friend Sean read it, and he said it like totally changed the way he approached the church." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm awesome. I know what's up." But in hindsight, I'm like, "Oh God, no, that was terrible."
Well, you just said Christian bookstore, and it reminded me of another writer that I feel like I need to mention on this list is fictionally Frank Peretti.
Frank Peretti.
I loved me some Frank Peretti. The Oath.
Yeah, The Oath. I was Presence of Darkness.
Yeah, This Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness.
Present Darkness and what was the other one?
Piercing the Darkness.
Piercing the Darkness. Weirdly, I read Piercing the Darkness first. It was because of some homeschool curriculum I had.
Yeah. Very postmodern of you.
So I there's a few names I have to drop that I haven't yet.
Go for it. 1, 2, 3.
Big Shane Claiborne.
Big Shay Claiborne.
Shane Claiborne heavily influenced me. I mean, I was like on the verge of starting a intentional community / cult because of that book. Yeah, you were around.
I came one week. I love Shane Claiborne.
I'm so glad that never worked out because I'm like I was trying to start a cult. I mean, like I wouldn't have been like a narcissistic, sociopathic leader, right. But it would have been a really weird ass like concentric community that. Yeah, God, no. Like in hindsight, I'm like, I had no fucking idea what I was doing.
Ryan Murphy would have eventually done a series on it.
Seriously, eventually. Definitely big Rob Bell fan. Rob Bell influenced my theology a lot, but more than that, even I think just diving into all the authors that Rob Bell would like footnote.
Yeah,
helped a lot because I was like, okay, I can tell Rob Bell is like the pop version of this. Let me dive in and get more into it with the heavier stuff.
Paul David Tripp, I liked his.
Did you read Spurgeon? Were you a Spurgeon fan?
Oh, yeah, but not super much. He kind of, that like sometimes when people talk in that era, I'm just like, why are you talking like that? Like
right.
I get like it was the time and everything, but like couldn't you just admit that your time was stupid? Yeah. And you could just talk how I would understand it a little bit better. Thanks. That's all. That's all I'm asking for is for time travel and the butterfly effect to benefit my reading comprehension.
I will say this: as much as I like shit on your worldview back then and now, still.
Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. I wouldn't say I was a fan of John Piper, but I respected John Piper's exegetical approach because it was hard to come by Christian authors that really took a serious exegetical approach to things. Everybody was doing like, expository, like just grabbing from all over the place and not really diving into specific texts. The Bible is 66 separate texts. It's not
right
one big text.
Yeah, he was big into like the verse by verse reading in preaching it that way. That's what I wanted to do.
Didn't he spend like 6 years going through Romans?
Yeah, it was a exegetical explosion.
Exegetical explosion.
You got to preach the one verse by one verse before you get to the 66 other books.
Now you're Bernie Sanders.
It's the same thing. It's the same person with a different wig on, hardly. Honestly, let's be honest.
John Piper would never support the queer community like Bernie Sanders.
Never.
Well, there's no like reasonable segue into our guest.
Yeah, introduce us to our guest, will you please?
Yeah, I will. Our guest today is Victoria Lynn Myers. She is an Instagram
Middle
model.
name, is she in trouble?
Lynn. Victoria Lynn Myers. Get your butt over here. No, she's an Instagram model now. Grew up in you're about to find out like how deep the fundamentalist rabbit hole goes. And that juxtaposition alone was fascinating enough for me to be like, will you be on the show? So, yeah, Victoria, how's it going over there?
Hey, good. How are you guys?
Doing very good.
Good.
Do you have any authors that you liked from back in your Christian days?
You know what? That's interesting because actually, like in the sphere that I was in, they didn't really like recommend any books. Whenever we go to the Christian bookstore, it would just be specifically to get the KJV. It wouldn't be to look at any of the books because like all of the books were way too liberal. We would literally go in, get our Bibles, and get out.
Whoa.
I'm picturing that meme of like her looking at the Bible and the KJV's like, why aren't you looking at me? And she's looking at an NIV with a nice binding.
Literally.
Right.
That's what it was.
She wants to get her hands on that spine.
With the indices. Oof. Yeah.
Wow.
And get her name engraved on it.
Or she can get amplified, the one that says everything 3 times, the one that overwords everything, the one that repeats
amplified.
itself.
We really like brackets. When we get back, we're going to talk to Victoria about her time in a fundamentalist Baptist cult and the long journey out.
We'll be right back right after this.
Let me kind of unpack that for you a little bit.
Fuck being in the middle, I am no Malcolm, I ain't no Martin. More like 95 Spartans kicked out the garden. Back to back stab at God King and ask for his pardon. My mind trying to break out the Martin.
Oh, hello there, Chuck. I didn't see you there. How are you?
Good. Just editing the episode. What's up?
What's up? Oh, you commoner and your common talk. I guess I'm what you would say, doing not much.
What is this?
Chuck, psst, psst, Chuck, it's me, your pal Brady. I'm practicing patronizing, so I'm working on being more condescending to people. Oh, do you have any idea where Matt could get some crumpets around here?
Why are you doing this?
You know, for our Patreon. We've been asking people to patronize our page, and I didn't want to ask them to do something I wasn't willing to do it myself, so I figured I'd get some practice in.
Oh, God. Brady, no, that's not what it means.
Oh, no?
Listen, listeners can go to our Patreon page, pick the level you want to contribute. Each level has special rewards,
Okay.
like exclusive Life After minisodes,
Or not safe for work bloopers?
or like a monthly collection of deconstruction memes.
And even personal consultations or meet up with your favorite host, Chuck and Brady?
Yeah, Brady. Patreon.com/thelifeafter.
I guess even you could find it.
And welcome back to The Life After. We are here with Victoria Lynn Myers and my co-host, Brady Harden.
Hey.
Hi.
Howdy.
Howdy.
So, Victoria, you grew up in Virginia. What part of Virginia?
Manassas. It's like 30 minutes from DC.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And you grew up in I guess what you would call a fundamentalist Baptist cult. So it's like fundamentalist Baptist on steroids.
Right. The most extreme.
That's wild. And
Yeah.
And is your parents and your family are like still in this community, right?
Yeah, so it's weird because my family, my mom and dad are very much extreme versions. Like the rest of my family on my mom's side is still religious. I mean, they still believe in God and everything, but they aren't the extreme version like my family is.
Okay.
And so growing up, we were never around family either. Like we were only around my mom and dad and my brother because like the rest of them drank, the rest of them smoked, the rest of them cut.
Oh, yeah.
And so we grew up even segregating ourselves from them.
So, okay, that's actually a really good start because like that's some extreme shit when you're even isolated from your own family. Not just like the outside world, but like literally your family, your like aunts and uncles, and for your parents, their siblings.
Yeah.
So,
like we would see them probably once a year. It wasn't a thing. Like they'd invite us over and we'd always think of a reason or something to not be able to go.
Oh, okay.
So there was always an excuse, but you know, you kind of put two and two together. And plus like my dad was a very big alcoholic before they had me and my brother.
Okay.
And so like even being around alcohol, I feel like was a trigger. And so they just didn't, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a little bit more sense, but still like feels very
still
misguided
weird.
and unhealthy.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So aside from like this kind of, I feel like isolation is kind of going to be a theme in this episode, both before and after your deconstruction. I won't get into that, but what were some of the rules that this cult and that your family like enforced? Like there were some really extreme things.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of this stuff wasn't like, I would even say biblical. Like whenever I'd ask them where they got the rules, it was like they couldn't even tell me because it was just that far in. Like 6-inch rule with guys and girls. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but like even if you're an adult and if you're dating, you're only supposed to sit 6 inches or further apart. They would literally, like at the college that I went to, they had dividers in between because you couldn't sit any closer, else you get written up.
Oh my God.
Dividers, like wait, dividers on the like the pews or like
the pews, the benches, everywhere.
How much
horrible.
do they spend on dividers?
It was horrible.
They gotta put dividers in the
we're
budget
gonna
every
need you
year.
to tithe a little more because all the dividers we had to add, you know, just ridiculous.
Some churches probably donated them.
Right, it's ridiculous.
They
So
put
they
them in a
had that
shoebox.
going. Everything was very hypersexualized, but like not really, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But so women were very much controlled. Shirts all the way up to here. Skirts 4 inches below the knee or lower. Like I was a cheerleader on the like Christian or Baptist like cheer team. Okay, but we couldn't do any stunts. You couldn't, like, we literally practiced just jumping up and down because we wanted to make sure our skirts didn't come above 4 inches above our knee or below our knee.
I'm trying to picture. You need to send us a picture of you as a cheerleader with a skirt that goes below your knees.
I think those are called modesty hops.
Yeah,
modesty hops.
Literally no stunts, just jumping in place. And you have to make sure when you jumped, we had it down to a T where it couldn't go any higher than 4 inches below our knee, or else they would look at us and be like, not gonna fly.
Whoa.
Dear
You're literally not gonna fly as a cheerleader because had no flyers because you couldn't do
Literally.
stunts.
God, somebody watched Bring It On last week.
I watch Bring It On every week.
So with that, I mean, they had purity culture was a big thing. Purity rings were a big thing. Like once you got your period, it was really odd. Like your dad found
creepy.
out that you got your period, and then like my friends and they'd be given rings, like, and you'd wear it on your wedding ring finger.
What?
And you'd promise that you wouldn't have sex before marriage. Like you promised your virginity to your dad until you were married, which is very, very weird and very scary now that I've
all too common, but like just every time I hear it described, it's like,
it's so gross. It is so gross.
Promising anything that has to do with your genitals to your dad is weird, okay?
It's very weird. It's very, very weird.
Well, I didn't know about the timing of getting those rings at your first.
Oh, I did. Yeah, that's
creepy.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Like, did you have one of these rings?
Yeah, so I grew up not very, I mean, I'm still not very like established financially, but we grew up pretty poor. And that's pretty privileged to say because it wasn't as bad as a lot of other people, but we didn't grow up with everything. And my dad actually gave me his mom's,
God, everybody's
like,
involved.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
It's like if you have sex before marriage, your grandmother's
that is
ghost
so
will be watching.
scary.
Yeah, that's super weird.
Yeah, that's very weird. So that was a thing at our school. Until you were a senior or like a junior, your dad would take you to every function. So like homecoming, your dad would take you there.
Ew.
It was in a gymnasium, and like we would just, I don't know if that's normal even in public school because I never went to a public school. I was born and raised independent fundamental Baptist from like the minute that I was out of my mom's womb.
Right.
I was straight into the nursery and straight into indoctrination.
Yeah, we would have him in the gym. Like, gym
really?
dances and stuff.
That sounds about right. So
we try to make him look cute with a couple of like strings of
fabric
or Christmas lights.
Thankfully, I managed to skip that. But okay, so I dodged it I skirted it because my parents, by the time I was that age, my parents went to a different church than me. Like I sort of started carving my own path. So but it was weird. Like at the time I was like, oh man, I kind of wish my parents would do this with me. I'm really glad they didn't in hindsight. Woo.
Yeah, for real. You missed out on some traumatic incidents.
So, okay. So you mentioned like school and college. You were in this like fundamentalist educational track all the way through, right?
Correct. I followed it all the way through.
Okay, so
which is crazy.
Yeah, that's wild. So grade school, high school, college, this was all like pretty closely tied to the community that you were a part of.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so sad now, like realizing that I didn't even get a general education. Like the teachers there all were taught by fundamental Baptists, and they were specifically taught like Bible stuff, but nothing else. So even our like math teachers and everybody didn't really know anything about what they were teaching. So like in high school, I think the highest education I got in regards to math was like Algebra 1, because like every year we would finish like a half or a quarter of the book because they couldn't teach it because there was like, they just couldn't. It wasn't accredited or anything. Yeah. Like, and my parents were paying. That's the thing. They were struggling, you know what I mean? Trying to make bills meet. And then they're paying all this money for a crappy education. It's just so sad, you know?
Yeah. Oh man, I get
rough.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super rough. I mean, like I was homeschooled through 10th grade, and at that point I was like, now I'm going to school. Like I'm going to real school.
Yeah, no.
And I still went to a Christian high school, but it was a Christian college prep school, so I ended up with a really good education. But like there's like we haven't really talked about Christian education a lot on the show, and like that's something we need to dive into probably at some point. I mean, Chris Stroop has the hashtag expose Christian schools. And then there's like this whole homeschooling thing. We've had a lot of guests that homeschooled, and the curriculum comes up short in a lot, especially with science. Like you don't learn you learn like really weird science. Yeah,
you don't learn evolution or like any of the basic principles. Like I just learned about evolution like a year and a half ago or maybe a year ago. Like, and it was me like looking it up and everything and trying to get educated on it because no one taught me anything, you know what I mean? And that's just wild to me. Like it's wild to me that my family still doesn't even acknowledge that that's a thing. That's crazy.
Go ahead.
And just to see that as a pattern of knowing, hey, here's this huge chunk of thing that you know about, and when you bring it up to people who are still deep into the fundamentalism, it's kind of like a whole other fucking different language for them.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's like, I just don't understand how you could be in denial of something so basic. And it's just it's just wild. But yeah, I went to religious school all the way through grade school, high school. There was probably about 100 kids in our whole school because it's funny, like my class in 6th grade started out with probably like 25 students. And by the time we had reached 12th grade, there was 5 of us because everybody had gotten like kicked out because of stupid stuff. Like, we caught you wearing pants.
Way.
We caught you wearing pants. We caught you holding hands. We caught you like, get out.
What?
And it's so sad now because of how I treated these people.
Yeah.
How I treated these people was like, oh, you're pieces of shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I treated
Taught
them
to
so.
shun. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now I've had to go back and be like, I'm so sorry. Like, you were just trying to be a little normal. And like, I was so stuck into it and trying to be such a people pleaser that I ended up probably adding more insult than injury, to the injury. Like, it just wasn't very kind of me. And I've had to go back and like apologize.
How did you feel at the time about people being shunned and people being cut off? Because obviously you have very different feelings now.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird in retrospect to know that I'm the person that they're now preaching about. And I'm like, maybe not necessarily me, Victoria Myers, but definitely people that do what I'm doing are now the topic of conversation. And before I was sitting on the front row nodding my head like, yes,
Exactly.
get them, get them,
Same
and
here,
it's just
same here,
so
yeah.
weird. It's so weird. And it's like you disassociate. It's like you turn off your brain, you just nod. I was a huge people pleaser. Like it's in me through and through. And so I did everything I could to check every box off every list and get every gold star. So if they said a person was wrong, I didn't question it. I just said they're wrong. I'm not their friend anymore moving forward type of thing. And it's so crappy now. There's no loyalty there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no kindness. There's no like, and especially the rules that they set in place. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, a person chose a different article of clothing than what she would choose. Like, why
So
cut them
much-
off?
yeah.
You know? Yeah, it's so weird.
There's such an obsession within Christian, like with independent Baptist, about pants. Good God.
Yes.
Like, that is one
Yeah.
cross they are gonna
Yes.
die on.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be an asshole, but is there only one haircut for the women, or is it
Right.
just me?
No, it's absolutely
Definitely.
like, and they preach against that. Like, if your hair, like for guys, if your hair touches your ear, you're like evil. Like you're
What?
so liberal, like God will spew you
Your
out
hair
and all
touches
this.
your ear.
Yeah, like that is the sign. Like they would literally, for girls, they would do dress checks where you'd have to get on the floor and like you'd sit on the floor like on your knees. And if your skirt didn't come to the floor, you would get sent home from school. And if the guys, the ear, like they would literally, at one point they brought like trimmers.
Oh my God.
And the guys would have hair checks. And if it was touching their ear, I kid you not, they would shave it.
What the fuck? What the fuck? What? Why?
Yeah, I don't understand it. Because is that like a sign of being effeminate?
No,
Maybe
I think
one
it's
of
more of a
me?
sign of like, well, maybe that's it. And they're really afraid of men having emotion. They're really afraid of men
sure.
having, you know what I mean? All of that toxic
course.
masculinity.
Yeah,
I'm
all that
sure
bullshit.
if we delved into it, that would be part of it.
Yeah.
But I think just I don't know if somebody like set this rule up and then they just followed it. But yeah, guys that did that, they were liberal and like, don't hang around them. And they're like possessed or all this crazy stuff that they said, you know?
Bonkers.
Possessed.
Yeah, it's wild.
Bonkers. But you're saying that you touched on this earlier, and is it okay if we jump into like how it was a hypersexual culture, but not at the
Yeah,
same
for sure.
time?
Yeah.
Was like this obsession about the skirt lengths.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
that's such a strange fetish
Concept.
almost of like just
Yeah.
like a zoning in on the tension. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, why is this such a big fucking
Why is this
deal?
a big deal?
But I
Yeah.
like how you worded it, that it's like such a hyper like sexualized thing, but at the same time, it's also kind of like based on not having sex, and so it's kind of like its own like weird
it's
thing, right?
Like this is like a huge thing for me. Before you comment on it, Victoria, Christian culture. Okay, so my mantra is repression doesn't work, right? So it's like you have enough people trying to repress their sexuality so hard, like literally trying to create an asexual culture, like a culture that is in denial of sexuality, except for the exclusive, people that are married that get to engage in sexuality, but even they shouldn't like talk about it. It shouldn't be part of the culture. And it's almost like this like embarrassing side note that we have to address because you're getting married and you're going to have to do this. And it's just like, of course, repression results in hypersexuality. It results in you like seeing the world through the lens of sex because you're trying so hard to hold it back that your body is literally just trying to find a way to let it out. So it just becomes all encompassing.
For sure. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. It's just insane to me that like they don't plan on talking to you about sex regardless of your age until the night before you get married.
God,
because they don't want to address it because they think if they address it that'll tempt you. It's like do you not understand how everything works? Do you not understand, like, I don't know, like, so that was their plan. And the weird thing is like you said, like they were very focused on skirt lengths. I mean, they preached and taught against even wearing sandals because it elongated your legs apparently. And so like you couldn't, like they didn't believe in wearing sandals. Like you'd get sent home for the most ridiculous things, like sleeves even needed to be like, they couldn't be even cap sleeves. It had to be like a full sleeve or longer because like arms were apparently fetishized. I mean, the most insane things became a fetish or like a hyper focus without saying it because there was so much withholding.
Right.
So what you mentioned a second ago about your dad being an alcoholic, right?
Yeah.
And going in situations where he doesn't want to be triggered or whatever. With the church, we had such an obsession about not leading others into temptation.
Oh my
God,
yeah.
To where it became like our fault with it. And us as Baptists, there was the obsession about alcohol, right?
For
about
sure,
like we don't want to cause anybody to stumble. Yeah. But like, what do you that line though between okay, I've got a friend who is an alcoholic. Am I going to invite them to go to the bar? No. But if I accidentally have alcohol, is that going to send them into the spiral? No. But we were
it's
taught
not really your responsibility. You know what I mean?
We were taught that was our responsibility, weren't we?
Yeah.
And it's,
I don't know. It's very interesting. They put so much weight on specifically women to like hold the responsibility of a bunch of men, especially, I mean, it's ridiculous hoops we're having to jump through for men. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I have anything hanging out at that point. It's literally like, like my skirts are down to my ankles. I can't even wear flip flops. You know, my shirts are up here and you're still sending me home as a 6th grade girl.
Wow.
And the teachers are all like at least 30 to 40 years old and you're fetishizing everything about us. That's just it's so weird now to reflect on.
It's so bizarre. So so that I feel like all of that repression, it came out in some really ugly ways in your community, right?
For sure. So it's not uncommon. There's this one man in our church that you guys have talked several times about how repression doesn't work, which I totally agree with. There's this one married guy who I believe is gay, who has messed with several young boys that the church has not denounced at all, but then has made the boys that have now, I mean, some of them identify as gay and whatever, they've made them feel bad for their sexuality, but they're not denouncing the person that did a lot of these issues. And then also pastors. I mean, it's not uncommon. There's a pastor up here, Jack Scott. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him or not. First Baptist Church of Hammond. It's a pretty big, huge church. He actually went to jail. He actually served some time for having, I don't know if he had sex with a minor or if he was just kind of like luring in. But she was a minor, and he took her across state lines to have sex with her.
Oh, my God.
And so there was a big scandal with that, too. Also, like, we can touch kind of on some stuff that happened. I guess, so I had a best friend, and, like, we ended up, like, they would really... Okay, whenever you have segregation of girls and guys, like guys all the way up into high school would ride on separate buses. The girls would all stay in the same room, same bed, and guys would do the same.
Right.
And whenever you repress people and you tell them sexuality is bad and stuff like that, then it's going to lead to other things. And
Well, and the lack of
actually,
education too.
lack of education, absolutely. When you're not talking to people about stuff, you're not educating them, and then all of this stuff, like, it was very common that a lot of girls were like, I don't know what they identify with, but a lot of girls were doing stuff too, because
Yeah.
it's like, it just kind of made sense.
Right.
So
Yeah. I got the sense from like talking to you before this interview that like it seemed like deviant forms of like sexual like molestation or something were like fairly common.
Yeah, very common.
That
Very
sucks.
common. Yeah, it's very common. And also something we can talk about is like the correlation with that, and also like, sexual assault victims and stuff like that, because as somebody that has witnessed this, it became my normal, you know what I mean? It became my world, it became my reality. And seeing so many people, like, it wasn't uncommon whenever Facebook became a thing. I got on there in like 6th or 7th grade, maybe 8th grade. And I had friends' dads sliding into my DMs and like,
Jesus.
sending winky faces and stuff like that.
Oh
and
my
like, I have a secret I want to tell you. And they'd be sitting in the choir loft looking at me the whole sermon, winking at me and stuff.
Oh God.
You know what I
fuck.
mean? Like, this was very, very, very common in my sector of religion.
Ew.
Yeah, for sure.
And like the claim, it's just so weird to me that the claim is that this is like we are following these rules to make this an asexual or sexually safe space.
Right.
And it's like absolute, like 120% doing the opposite of that.
Exactly. Yeah. Ignorance.
So you had, okay, so in these, one of the problems that I don't think we've like directly addressed on this show with like these communities that have really strict rules about sexuality is that if you have a sexual experience, you don't have any outlet to talk about it. Right?
No, definitely not.
And that was true for you.
For sure. Yes. And I've dealt with like guilt and like confusion and isolation because of that. And and up until now, I didn't know of you guys. I didn't know of any resources. I didn't know of anybody really to talk to. So I felt like I was just having internal dialogue. And, there'd be days where I'd be driving to work or whatever, and I'd just be breaking down crying and like, just really trying to deal with stuff, and never got any type of closure, any type of conversations, because everything was so hush hush that you couldn't even talk about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so like my first experience, like it was something that happened, and it happened behind closed doors, and we were never allowed to actually talk about it. And so that went on for years of us doing things and not talking about it. And finally me at some point realizing like, this is what this is. Let me confront this person and kind of try to at least see what we are, maybe get something out of this, because I deeply loved her. And then like being kind of like shot down, you know what I mean? Yeah, that was really heartbreaking, because it's like, I don't know. I just recently came to the realization, a lot of people have asked me what has caused me to like leave this type of environment. I mean, there's so many obvious reasons at this point, but I think I had always used the excuse that, I just started wearing pants and people started DMing me, calling me a slut or whatever. And then I was just like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm just listening to normal music. I still identified as a fundamental Baptist. You're already abandoning me.
Wow.
And it caused me to start questioning things. But actually, I think more so, it was me having a good sexual experience with somebody of the same gender, and it feeling completely natural and feeling like nothing was wrong. And then going to church and being screamed at and being told that this is evil. And I just didn't connect until recently that was probably part of how I started deconstructing, is because I just didn't see eye to eye on that, because it felt natural. It felt wholesome. It felt like everything they were acting like it wasn't.
Yeah.
That's huge. Jamie Lee Finch talked about that with one of her first experiences, was positive and it was great. And she also talks about like other women that she's talked to that have that same experience. And it's not until you talk to a church person that you start feeling that shame.
The guilt. Yeah.
And you get told, no, this is how you're supposed to be feeling right now.
Yeah.
This is, and that's what fundamentalism is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like this is what you're supposed to be seeing. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what you're supposed to be feeling.
Right.
And
that's what you're supposed to be feeling that's the big bad thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
say, like the doing and like the rules is like that's one level of bad, but telling people how to feel is a totally different level of horrible human behavior.
Well, I mean, especially whenever that system only has feelings as its foundation, its personal foundation, its personal evidence to people is
sure.
like, it's not going to show itself. It has nothing to show. The only thing that you're going off is your feelings. And if it's telling you what to feel, that is fucking, the emperor has no clothes at this point. Like, it is telling you, this is what I'm wearing. Aren't I? Aren't I?
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah, totally. And
Bullshit.
it's interesting because that experience with her. So I've always considered myself like a very conscious person, a person that sees reality for actually what it is. And I had always talked to myself and had this voice that believed that I had reached out to her. So her family was missionaries to Israel. And we had been very close friends. I had very bad anxiety attacks, panic attacks, 6th grade and through like 8th grade.
Wow.
And having her as a stable friend like really caused me to kind of eliminate those, because I had no stability in my life prior to that. My brother, a family member, was really big into drugs and stuff like that. And all of this instability anyway. And having her really eliminated that. And I remember one day her asking me like, Tori, how long has it been since you've had anxiety attacks? And I was like, oh my God, it's been so long, because like I just had you as my stability person in my life that's caused some stability, and just noticing how much that meant to me. And then from there, we gradually formed like a relationship. And I had always thought that whenever I had emailed her and brought up, hey, like, this is how I'm feeling, how do you feel? That's how I always thought that I had put it. And recently I reached out to her just to get closure, because I was still thinking, and like, I couldn't get over it, because she had been a significant part of my life. And regardless of us being in a relationship or just a friendship, like just the fact that she had helped me so much, I just couldn't get over losing a person like that. Totally. And so I reached out to her and was like, hey, like, this is how I felt. This is how, I don't know how I worded it. And she said, Tori, actually, you said, I'm not like this, and kind of cut me off. So that was wild to like hear. And that was like very devastating and very heartbreaking, because I had ran this narrative in my brain that I had like told her my feelings, but I didn't have the proper tools at that time either. I can't really, you know what I mean? But I cried whenever I got that email, because I was like, wow, like it was lost time. She's now married and a missionary now. So it's it's past time. And I knew that. I knew it was past time. It was just, I needed closure because I couldn't move on mentally. And then it was wild to hear her be like, this was not what you said, Yeah.
And I hope you're able to kind of like look at that non-judgmentally towards yourself, because it's like you said, we have these narratives of how things happened back then, but you're absolutely right. We didn't have the categories to even understand what we were looking at.
Yeah.
It's like expecting us to be able to describe something that we don't even have categories in our brain to describe. And I think a lot of our listeners, and myself included, have a lot of these things that we look back at, or of our ignorance. And what we have to understand about ignorance is that it is linear. The shit that we know now, we didn't know then. And so we're judging ourselves now based on knowledge that we didn't have then. I like how you worded that.
Actively kept from having on top of external forces.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I'm thinking about when you're saying all this is like, how often as a healthy, mature sexual adult, like I talk to the people around me about my romantic and sexual relationships.
Oh wait, you're the healthy person in this scenario?
I mean, yeah, right. No, absolutely not. But no, but I'm just thinking about like how important that is for me now, and how that was, I mean, I think it was sort of denied to all of us in a certain sense to have like a proper space within Christianity to talk about your crushes and your sexual feelings and your sexual encounters and your first kiss and your, you know, like the things you heard about and things you saw on the internet and just all that shit that you don't have space to talk about and how bad that is. And like you're dealing with that now, like years later.
Yeah.
Because you just didn't have a place to put it at the time.
Yeah, no, I didn't. And I didn't even know what it was at the time. And that's so weird to me now to reflect on. Another thing that was very interesting now that I'm trying to like, I mean, I identify as bisexual, but I would say like another thing is that the hypersexualization and like the focusing on women's modesty and stuff has caused me to have even more confusion because it's like it's trained me to check out every woman that comes in, you know what I mean, and really focus on her clothing. And as I'm questioning who I am and whatever, that has been like a big mind fuck too, because it's like I'm already attracted to both guys and girls. And then like, but before I didn't even acknowledge that, and seeing myself 24/7, like checking out women. And it was just very confusing because I'm like, am I checking them out because I'm judging them because of the way I was raised? Or am I, you know, it was a lot to process.
Wow. Yeah.
And we always come up with that's a big thing that I know about people. Like when I talk to other people who are queer and they had to repress themselves or anywhere on the spectrum, is that we come up with weird ass little excuses in our minds of like, oh, well, I'm not checking him out. I just want my body to look like that.
Right.
Or,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
that's exactly what it's
Yeah.
doing. There's always like some weird way in our minds that we justify it, and that's completely normal. We do need to take a break, but when we get back, we're going to dive more into like what started to pull you away from all of this, and like you said, where you started to ask your own questions and realize your own life, and that you can make your own decisions. So we will be right back right after this. Okay, Chuck, are you ready? We only have one shot. We got to make this work.
Wait, you didn't
just read your lines. I'll give you the paper. Okay. Psst, are you guys ready? Are you ready? All right. Are you ready to deconstruct with friends?
What the hell? Where did all this come from?
Deconstructing your faith used to be lonely and boring as hell.
Wait.
But no one must deconstruct their faith alone ever again when you deconstruct with friends. Chuck, tell them what we mean.
Yeah, that's right, Brady.
Yeah.
The Life After has a. What the hell, Brady?
I went full on Jumanji on this one, but keep going. He's a rental by the hour.
The Life After podcast has a secret Facebook community and Slack channel for people deconstructing the Christian fundamentalism and other oppressive religions. Meet new people and deconstruct with friends.
Nice job, Chuck. You even got the echo.
Thanks. That was kind of cool, I guess. Oh God, he's touching me with his trunk.
You can apply for the secret group.
It's wet.
On our Facebook by answering 3 entrance questions. Your membership is hidden, and the admins keep the room constructive and helpful.
Now, can we get this elephant out of here?
Nope, probably not. But we can.
Deconstruct with friends.
Self-destructive behavior.
It's all self-destructive behavior, Brady. We're all just gonna die.
Yeah, pretty much.
Welcome back to the Life After. That's the sound of a Natter Days opening. Natter Days, the official beer of the Life After. They have to pay us. No,
yeah, that's how it works.
We're in the studio with my co-host Brady Harden and Victoria Lynn Myers. Victoria,
she's not in her studio though, like virtually.
Yeah, she's in the virtual studio
via satellite.
We're looking at her face on a screen in the studio.
Before you jump in, over break, we
It's
were
actually via fiber optic cables, but yeah, that's fine.
Well, actually, it's through the fiber optic cables that we're able to see our friend Victoria through the internet. Before we get started, we were talking on at the break about how, like, just an observation about how fundamentalism makes everything smaller. Like, it's all about laser focusing your beliefs and cutting all the people who don't get into that laser
And thoughts.
And thoughts and
Just
like
everything.
just obsession. And then what Victoria was saying was that even though her experience has been different than our guest on this show, there's always something that's like we have in common with our guest. And I think that's interesting to not Victoria fundamentalism. It makes everything so small, but really our shared experiences, I think, just makes the world more relatable. And I think that's kind of a cool direction. I'm all about directions lately of like, this is how the direction of this system goes in. And then now here's this system that just reality goes in. And how different those are is so different. What were you going to ask? I'm sorry. Let's jump.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. No, that's a really good point. And it's also like a really good sort of springboard for community building because we have this shared common experience. It's important that we don't trauma bond over it, but
Yeah.
Well, okay.
we can't get into that. Google it.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll probably talk about it on the show at some point.
I was going to ask for
but yeah, no, it's great for meeting other people. And that, I mean, like, honestly, a huge part of this is like just struggling to find people that have your shared experience. That's like a big part of Victoria's story. And it's a good thing to go off of. So, okay. So Victoria, you were sort of like, you did this like grade school, high school, college thing. At some point you found yourself like confronted with the proposition of an arranged marriage of sorts, kind of. Is that
yeah.
What did that story, how did that work out? Because that shit's wild.
So yeah, it's wild. So it's interesting because the way that dating works in the fundamental Baptist cult type thing where I grew up is that you don't date outside of the church. You know, you don't communicate even with outside of the church.
Ew.
Like, you're very much separated your entire life from anybody else unless you're trying to witness to them. We used to go door to door and stuff like that. Yeah, horrible, traumatic experience.
I forgot you used to do the door-to-door stuff.
Yeah, that was horrible. Yeah. It's also, I've recently thought about how crazy it is that my family and all of the church members go to people at their hospital, like on their deathbed, and try to witness to them too.
Oh my God.
How crappy is that they're like, you're going to burn in hell. You know what I mean? As they're about to take their last breath. That's wild.
Oh my God.
Yes, they do that. It's wild. I'm like, and they think, the thing is that they think that it's like they're doing God's work. You know what I mean?
Of course.
We get him in at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. So, but anyway, about the arranged marriage type thing. So it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't say it was arranged in a sense, but it kind of was. I mean, everything was kind of arranged because you were only dating within there, and they like very much picked and helped pick your partners or whatever. But like, so dating was already very weird because you couldn't spend any one-on-one time with the person. If you were in like a car alone, you would get written up or whatever. You had to ask for permission even in college. Like, you'd have to fill out these slips that said where you were going to be, who was going to be the chaperone, and they were with you the whole time up until they drop you off. And like, you couldn't even sit at a table at a restaurant alone. Like, you couldn't be anywhere alone. You never got to know the person. And the minute that you wanted to be alone, they recommended that you get married. So like, that was everybody there. Everybody there.
Oh, that's such a bad idea on so many levels.
It's such a bad idea because you don't know anybody.
Yeah,
you're just going off of like barely even a feeling. And then they're like, if you want to be alone, you need to get married. So that was what everybody did. I mean, it was not abnormal to be 18 and engaged. You know what I mean? It was not abnormal.
The minute
I was such
a shithead when I was 18.
Yeah, and everybody is. Everybody is. But like, this is what they recommended. You know what I mean? Because they didn't want to talk about sex until the night before the wedding. They didn't want to even deal with that.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to even be alone with somebody to even see if you had any feelings for them, you needed to get married.
Well, I mean, the Bible legitimately even makes, if you're burning with lust, get married. It makes like wanting
Right.
to bone someone a legitimate reason for
Fucking
to make a
Paul.
decision for the rest of your life, right? Like,
Paul.
so
Yeah.
it's not, from their perspective, it's not that bonkers, but like, from their perspective, that's bonkers.
Yeah, it's very weird.
yeah.
It's very weird to think like that. I don't understand and then you see people that are just like, they're married and unhappy, which is that's already the case with some people, but there's such a high divorce rate. Or if you're even allowed to get divorced, that's another thing. How many abusive
Preach.
spouses are in the church?
Oh, yeah.
And we had this one lady that was in our church that would come in with a black eye every week, but she'd have like
no, that's
makeup
so
over
sad.
it. They had a bunch of kids. It was just so sad to see.
That is so
And
sad.
I've talked to my parents several times about, like, you've created all these rules, but they're impossible to follow through and end up in a happy scenario.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
don't think about that. They set up rules and they don't think of the end
Well, and the rules
consequence.
don't protect you from the worst things that happen,
No,
right?
they
Like
don't.
abuse, like
Like the
physical
predators.
abuse.
Yeah,
There should be a
absolutely.
rule about that if you're going to make a bunch of fucking rules. Fuck, man.
And I
Yeah.
hate to do this to you, Victoria, because I know that you don't get like a lot of like movie references and everything, but it reminds me of the movie The Village. God, I go back to this movie a lot. I don't even like it that much. It just happens.
It's on point for what we talk about on
Right.
the show, so.
There we go. But it's like, they made a point of like, oh, we want to cut off from the rest of the world. We're going to have to do this. But then it always finds a way back. Like, you can have
for
all
sure.
of these rules, but like you said before, this human nature is still just going to find a way to erode
Yeah.
until it finds its own path, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, mama.
So what
And that happened.
what was your specific scenario? What did that look like? You met
what?
you wanted to like date this guy.
Yeah, I just wanted to even just ride in a car alone, and they're like, they're like, you need to get married. And so he bought a ring and proposed to me
Oh,
just
dear
so
God.
that we could be alone. And at that point I was like, okay, but he had some family issues. Like, there was a lot of things, like his mom is very
Wow.
much like
How old were you?
a little out there, and I mean that in the kindest way possible, but his mom was like monster-in-law like type of stuff, you know
I
what I
get
mean?
it.
And so I was like, before we get married or anything like that, you need to move out and live on your own for a little bit and establish an independence, because his family is very much like, they're all together, they're very, you know what I mean, they have no friends. It was very weird, like kind of, I've just come to the realization that it's like emotional incest type stuff.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
the way they were.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I wanted him out of that and to see like how he was before I ever agreed to anything.
Yeah.
That's smart.
And at that point he moved out, which was great. He had a job doing something and ended up being let go. Like, they were just letting people go. And so he ended up getting let go. And at that point I moved in with him just to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And his family found out, called my family who lived in Virginia, and told them that I had moved in, and everything was called off. And at that point I was like, fuck it. Like, why is this so bad? Like, it was not an ideal scenario, but it just felt very forced and coerced to the minute that you want to get to know somebody, you needed to get married. And then from there, like, you're just supposed to be with them for the rest of your life. And I didn't know this dude, you know what I mean? I didn't know him. And like, I never spent a minute alone with him. And then all of a sudden, like, I move in and I felt like better about it, because I was like, oh, good. Like, I can actually figure out if this will work. And then they're like calling off everything. And it was very, very stressful there for a little bit, because like, I've always had a good relationship with my family, but like, it was bad. And just seeing how they acted and stuff like that, and just, it went downhill from there. I mean, that was really a tall tale sign. I felt very forced into everything.
Wow. Jesus. That's just so not like there's a part of me that's like, oh yeah, arranged marriage, like, yeah, okay, you know, but
Yeah,
but then I'm
cool.
like, wait, what the fuck? Like, you're like a kid. How old were you when that was all?
I was 19.
Oh my god, yeah, you're a fucking kid, and you're like,
Yeah.
like if you show any like how do you get the idea that if anybody has like romantic feelings toward another person, that the next logical step is to get engaged? Like, where do you get that? Where do you get that idea? But it's not that far from, like, that's obviously in like an extreme Baptist fundamentalist cult version of that, but it's not that far from like how a lot of American churches think. It's like, oh, you have some sexual feelings. Okay, well, yeah, let's bag that up real quick. Let's just like make a nice package to like, this is how you're gonna live the rest of your fucking life.
Yeah. Well, because sexual feelings were only supposed to be for one person, and then when it comes to dating, or any of that, you're just supposed to know. I always felt like this pressure that you're just supposed to know, and then if you and then when things don't work out the way that you were hoping, then you have some story or some narrative that you would say of like, well, I prayed about it and the Lord just opened. I said, just wasn't what it was.
God just doesn't want us to date right now.
You know how gun-ho I was a few weeks ago? Well, none of that was as spiritual as I was making it out to be, to find out. And the only reason I found out was because he dumped me. So now here's this new story explaining, how I'm still spiritual, even though I didn't.
Yeah.
It was like always doing that shit, right?
Yeah, and it's kept a lot of people in a lot of toxic situations. If you date like that, then you don't know the person. 9 times out of 10, I mean, we all have issues, but you're getting yourself into something unaware. And a lot of times then they believe that God this is your helpmeet. And so it keeps people in very toxic situations unnecessarily.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
I would definitely say, based on what you're saying, Brady, I totally got married because I felt like I should have a feeling,
Right.
Like I would just know.
Yeah.
Like, no, not a lot of the logistical questions that you should ask before you get married, or even like question whether or not marriage as an institution is for you. Like, I was just like, no, this feels right.
And for me, like not knowing how I'm supposed to feel, and with my neuroses of spectrum, whatever, of like not knowing how feelings are supposed to be for people, and then it kind of like trying to go along with that of like, oh yeah, I think I'm doing this right. I guess it's just like adding another layer of the questioning that, but we're all experiencing that. It's such like a mind fuck. It's such a mind fuck.
It is.
So Victoria, did that contribute at all to your deconstruction, or when did things start to turn around for you where you're like, I think I need to get out of here?
So I think a big part was like the whole dating and not even being allowed to spend a minute together. I think another part was like whenever I started, just like whenever I was a kid and stuff, you'd have to sneak like music in, you know what I mean? Like as a 12th grader, I started trying to like sneak music in, and it was like the most innocent music, like Jason Mraz. And I was like, why is this bad? And then whenever I got into college, and then like I started working like a normal job, and then just talking to people finally that were normal and seeing, hey, they aren't that bad. Right. And then like the first time I wore pants, I literally got left at the store without a car by a family member because of the fact that they saw me try on a pair of pants. It wasn't even like I had owned one yet. I was just trying it on, and they left me.
Wow.
What was going through your head in that moment when you were like, I'm going to try some pants on?
I had wanted to my entire life, and I'm like, fuck it.
Yes,
Today's the day. Let's try on a pair of pants.
For sure.
Yeah, and I try it on, and I go to look in the mirror, and my family member walks by and sees me and like shook their head and walked out.
Oh my God. They're like, I don't know what to do right now.
It's time. Yeah. Just wild. Like stuff like that where it's just innocent stuff that's just like my choice of like expression or my choice of whatever.
How'd you get home that day?
And I think that in combination with me, like before questioning my sexuality, but being in a very healthy, I mean, as healthy as you could be for not even allowed to talk about it,
right.
And feeling how like just natural it felt. And then sitting in church and like hiding but holding hands with that person as they scream about like homosexuality being a sin or whatever. And it's just that kind of clicked for me. It's like, this is not bad at all. Like this, you know what I mean? I see tons of people in this church in tons of unhealthy situations, and this is not that. You're not yelling at them, but this is somehow a sin. And then all of this other stuff, you know, just added to it.
And from the perspective of your family member, they're thinking, oh, I'm really showing how important the word of God is,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and like that whole situation of just being so revolted by the sight of you wearing pants to them felt so real because of how their how their narrative and how they think and everything has been like structured within the abstract imagination of their brain. So it's like that reaction felt so real to them, but in all actuality was such a fucking small ass thing. Hey, my family member had pants on, but that revulsion that they felt confirmed it for them.
Oh yeah, for
the Lord's
sure.
convincing me because I felt it.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also very weird how much they like there's like you get to know your family and you get to know things that they actually truly are passionate about and other things that they just do just out of habit and or just out of the need for, you know, pleasing the other people in the church. And I've actually told my family specifically, like, these people that you think are your friends or whatever, the minute that you decide to put on a different article of clothing, the minute that you decide to listen to a Jason Mraz song, they're out of your life. You know what I mean? So why do you value them so much? Why do you value their opinions? And just seeing like my family specifically and how much they've given up that I would view as helpful things in life. Like my dad used to be in a band and like could have went far with that. He was pretty good. He gave that up. Just things that are like good to have, just hobbies that are good to have that help you with a lot of things. And just seeing them give up everything because having anything other than God was sinful. It just never resonated. Yeah, it just never resonated with me. And like it just now it's almost like they act out because they're bitter. Like a lot of people I feel like in the church are just following because it's been like something that's been passed down from generation to generation. And whenever somebody goes against status quo, it's like they have to express how disdained they are at it. It's not even necessarily that they actually give a shit though. It's more so it seems like they're actually bitter because they want to be living that life. And also just, I mean, the rhetoric that they're fed, you know?
That's a damn good point. Shit.
So, all of these rules, like, okay, so you eventually start moving away from the community. How did I'm trying to figure out how to even word this. How did your family react? Because we're taught. I mean, like the phrase that comes to mind is conditional love.
Oh yeah, and that's been something that has been very. If I'm honest with you, I'm still coming to terms with that because when you think of family, you think of somebody that loves you regardless and absolutely wants you to be yourself, and wants you to be happy. And I mean, obviously there's limits. I'm not saying, and whenever you say that to them, it's like they go, oh, you want to be a pedophile. You know, no, I just want to listen to normal music. Like, why do you go to extremes? Why is it one thing? Like, so, I mean,
also, like, the Bible doesn't say anything about pedophilia, so.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, we could get into all of that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I brought that up too to them. Yeah. But yeah, it's been very hard realizing that a lot of the things that I thought in my life were unconditional, were very conditional. And it's kind of traumatizing to realize that, especially with close family members, that like it's very much based on what you can do. Yeah. And that was one conversation I had recently with my family is I was, this has been like a slow progress with me and really coming to terms with who I am and being proud of that. And being proud of the things that I feel like I'm a better person than I ever would have been in religion because of the fact that their rhetoric is always remaining the same. They love remaining the same. The more you can stay on the old path, the better you are. And that is not the way I choose to live my life. I don't subscribe to those ideas. And I love the idea of progressing forward. I think there's things that we need to change that are not being changed and that are so toxic that are being promoted in those type of environments. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that I've changed. And I told my mom, just because I don't look like you, just because I don't follow the same rules as you does not mean I'm not a good person. You know what I mean? And like just the fact that I have to say that to close family members was kind of heartbreaking because they don't understand how much anxiety inducing this is. You feel very alone out in the world. You're trying to figure yourself out in every way, shape, and form because you've been so sheltered. You have nobody to go to. And you have to prove that you're still a good person to the people that are supposed to love you the most. And it's not even like you're out there. It's not even like I'm out there doing awful things. It's not like that at all. I'm out here, you know, trying to be the best person I can be. And that's not enough.
The prejudice is so deep, though, isn't it? I mean, and it mirrors so many other types of prejudice. People who don't look like me, they're immoral. People who don't believe the same as me, they're immoral. People who don't have sex the same as me, they're immoral. It's this constant, like, same thing, but instead of it being based on race or sexuality, now it's just based on arbitrarily believing that this one dude came back to life. You know, it's such a pain in the ass that it's that it's kind of like the one. Yeah, definitely discriminate people with belief. That's the one thing that's still okay. It feels like it's like because there's not the same terminology and vocabulary as there is with other types of discrimination necessarily. We're just automatically assumed that, oh well, these religious people are the good ones and people who don't have religion are the bad ones.
Right.
It's like, no, that's like we've seen the same pattern. Let's get smart and stop doing it over and
seriously.
over.
Totally. And now being like out of it and getting some normal interactions with normal people, it's like normally the opposite. Like I find that my prejudgments of people because of the programming and who they actually are like 10 times different. You know what I mean? And it's sad how many people you miss out on in life because of your prejudice.
Dr. Marlene.
That's absolutely, that's very true. Sorry.
That was kind of Dr. Marlene's story, was that when she started going to college and started talking to normal people and she had a waitress job, that was her kind of like ongoing thing where she was interacting with normal people and she was, oh God, they're different than I expected. You know, they're normal.
Yeah. And like better, they're like less judgmental. They're, you know, it's just, I mean, I wouldn't say across the board they're better because I don't like to generalize.
Not,
but
that's not how it is, right?
No, it's not how they made it out to be for sure. And it's almost like I would have rather had a little bit of a dose of reality. They shelter you so much to where you go into the world blindsided. And then you just start questioning literally everything because you had no stable foundation. And it's almost better if you just give us, I mean, obviously age appropriate things, but a little dose of reality would have helped and would have done so much for a lot of us. You know what I mean? Rather than keeping us sheltered and then us going out and getting a normal job or realizing. But the whole goal here is to never have us leave the flock. That's the whole purpose.
Right.
You keep us ignorant and keep us there. That's the whole purpose. I understand that, but it's been a mess.
Yeah, it's the question of like the difference between like your goal being a whole healthy person that is human and that has like control over their impulses but also like enjoys their life versus like this is the way that you should exist and you need to fit into this box. And it's like and you in the like you are honestly like in a way the cult that you grew up in makes more sense to me than a lot of Christianity because at least they were like going to extremes to try to fit into the space that they had allotted for themselves. At least they were like really thought that this was it and we're gonna cover all of the bases. Whereas a lot of Christianity is like, well, this is it, but we're not gonna address like all of these things. And I think they're both wrong, like super, super wrong, and not the way that we should live our lives. But like in a way, like if Christianity was true, I think communities like the one you grew up in make more sense than like, Lakewood Baptist or something.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
they were all in for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of why I was a Calvinist. I feel like too was if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it to the fucking extreme because I feel like it's an extreme thing, right? Like, you're not going to buy a motorcycle to read a book on it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So we should probably take a break. When we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about what Victoria's life is like now, or particularly what it was like after deconstructing, because there's some twists and turns there, but I like the way it turns out. So
we'll be right back right after this. If you were going to die tonight, do you know where
Stop. Just tell them about our website.
Oh, just tell them to go to thelifeafter.org?
Yes, they can go now, even without accepting Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. Thelifeafter.org. We have a blog, contact page, a link to our Facebook page, and more.
All right, thelifeafter.org.
Heavenly. And we're back here talking to Victoria Lynn Myers. Victoria, so I want to talk about your life now. It's we'll get into the more positive aspects, but it's kind of a mixed bag, right? Because I don't want to say I like this about your story, but like for the sake of this show, it's really important that everybody understands that like the act of leaving your community and your beliefs is like such a difficult process, and it's okay that it's difficult. Like you're gonna be fine, but like it takes some time, and like some difficult things can happen. So first of all, like isolation is like such a theme in your story because you grew up in this cult that was isolating you from the world around you, and you were like, by the time you were a teenager, you're obviously like grasping to understand the world that you live in better, and you're finding yourself just like not feeling like you're a part of the culture at large, and then you decide to leave and you're like, I'm going to join this culture that I've been so isolated from. But then you run into this super difficult thing, which is like so common with people that listen to the show, with people that have deconstructed their faith, that you didn't feel like you fit. You didn't feel like you had an into the world outside of your cult. So now you're like trapped in between, and you're feeling really, really, really isolated. What was that like for you?
Oh my God. It was bad. It was very traumatic, I would say. It was very isolating is the best word to put it. It's like whenever you lose everybody separates for whatever reason because you've decided to put on a pair of pants or whatever the ridiculous reason is. And then you need a community, and especially if you grew up in such a community where everybody was so close, it's like losing a family member. You know what I mean? It's like losing all of your family all at once. You have nobody. Yeah, you have nobody. You have nobody to turn to. Life doesn't stop when you lose these people. You continue on, but you don't have anybody to talk to anything about. You don't have any friends. You don't have any, like my family at that point. Like it's hard to talk to people in your life because even if you still are in communication with your family, I was lucky enough to still be in communication with my family, but since they go to church literally every day of the week and they don't have any hobbies, there's nothing to communicate. You know what I mean? They talk about the weather, but they don't support me. You know what I mean? And they believe that they can't actively support me. It's kind of the undertone. You can't actively support somebody in hopes that you'll bring them back. So you have to constantly remind them that you're in low-key ways that you're not proud of them, whatever it may be. And so that was very hard for me because as a people pleaser, and you're raised as a people pleaser. Everybody in your life, you suppress who you are and become everything that they want for you. And so whenever you're thrown out into the real world, it's hard to not seek that validation. And whenever you can't get that validation from anybody, it's traumatizing. And then also not having any friends. And then whenever you start trying to make friends, trying to explain your situation, trying to explain how you were raised, no one understands that. You know what I mean? You tell them you grew up religious and people assume you just went to church once a year, maybe on Christmas or whatever it may be. And so that was very hard for me to explain and reiterate that I grew up in such a stark environment. And even that, like, you don't have that connection that like maybe you and I would have because we grew up in such ridiculous environments. Sure. But most people that you meet at a bookstore or wherever it may be aren't going to understand that at the level that people like us would. And so it's been a slow process of trying to find myself and find other people that understand and are accepting of who I am.
Mm.
Yeah.
A step for me in that is like trying to become okay with internet friendships. Like as a thing, you know, because here in St. Louis, where I am, it's hard to find other people who've kind of like gone through this, who I, you know, get and connect with and everything for the same reasons that you're saying. And so the thing that we've kind of had to lean on is online stuff, right? Like you got a hold of Chuck on Instagram, and that's how we meet a lot of our guests and everything. And so kind of like learning to rewire our brain to find some of our social validation and community that we so desperately need, to do that online for a time or for permanent. I don't think there's anything wrong with it for being permanent, but we definitely need to like know that we're not the only ones going through this shit. And if that means that we need to go onto online friendship dating
right, yeah.
for a while, then I think it's time for us to normalize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I've noticed is that my prejudice against like certain people because of religion have really like kept me from maybe endearing friendships. You know what I mean? Like the closest friends that I have right now were people that I wouldn't have thought that I would be friends with because of the prejudices that I've had or been taught. And so really allowing yourself maybe in smaller ways to get to know people outside of the way you were raised, just to confirm that maybe, you know, those ideas that you were taught were wrong. And then slowly edging into that might be a good option, because like the best people that I know were people that I wouldn't have originally been friends with.
That's such a good point. Damn. That's
good.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Victoria, you had the reason I want to talk about this is because also trigger warning, we're about to talk about a sexual assault. So there is this like hyper valuing of innocence in Christian culture, and it's like I don't think we've really talked about this specifically on the show. And I've realized this is like something I've been putting a lot of thought to over the last few months, is that innocence is kind of like, it's really good for kids to be innocent, you know, unto a certain age, because there are just things in life that are like a little bit too much for young minds to handle, I think. But like when you're a tween and when you're like 14, 15, 16, it's like you're getting to an age where it's really important that you understand how the world works, because the world is kind of a shitty, harsh place where people will try to take advantage of you. And if you are not savvy with the way that the world works, you end up getting hurt. And you're a model, and you deal with various photographers that reach out to you and want to work with you, and you had a really negative experience with one of those. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually really liked his work, and I reached out to him to see. This was like probably 2 or 3 years ago, whenever I was really dipping my toe into everything. And I had reached out to him just to see about a possible collab. And he said, yeah, that's fine. You know, we'll meet up. And we had started planning a shoot. First shoot went fine. The intentions behind the shoot now in hindsight were grooming me. But at the time, I didn't even know what that was. And growing up and seeing just the way men acted towards women in the church, it still felt normal.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went along with it. And so the first shoot, I had never shot anything provocative, anything nude or anything like topless even. Nothing like that. I was not comfortable at that point with shooting that, and I made that known from the get-go. But he kept with the idea that the only way that I would be a successful model is if I learned to be comfortable in my own body, and that being comfortable in your own body meant showing more skin. And so that was the real narrative there. And I kept saying no, that I wasn't comfortable with that. But he was a pretty well-known photographer at that time. He worked with several agencies. And so I kind of took his word as the word. And so I wasn't comfortable with it. I told him no. But he was like, let me show you poses that could shade the areas that you don't want exposed, so that if somebody pressures you, you can do this. That was the guise.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our first shoot. Our second shoot that we planned was probably a few months later. He invited me to come to his studio and shoot with this other model that was signed, to get some experience, and then to go through selects. Selects are like pictures that we've already shot, to see which one he wants to edit, and then also shoot and like continue with the whole comfortable with my own body narrative. And I agreed because I liked the pictures that we had shot before. I hadn't had like a stable photographer that I even liked his work. So I was like, okay, so far so good. The narrative isn't necessarily what I like, but like it'll be fine. You know what I mean? And he was Polish, so he kind of played on that too. Like I don't know any better, type of thing. Anything
Sure.
time I had tried to like maybe stand a little bit of ground, but again, like the whole innocence thing and not being taught that you have a voice, and not being taught that you're a people pleaser, and being taught like you just need to comply. And if somebody is acting like they have your best intentions at heart, you need to trust them, was a big part of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I helped the other model with the shoot, and then we went to his place to shoot and become comfortable with my own body. Whenever he gets me there, through a series of events, he pretty much tells me to strip. And it was just me and him, and I tell him no, and he keeps telling me like, this is the only way you're going to succeed. This is the only way you're going to succeed, and keeps going. And I keep saying no, and he keeps going. And so I slowly undress and stand to the side with like my hand over my body, trying to shield myself as much as I can. I never shot like this before, and I was not comfortable with this whatsoever. And he starts to take pictures, and I didn't realize it. I was standing to the side, had my hand over my chest and over my vagina.
Yeah.
And I say, let me see the pictures. I look at the pictures, and it's just straight vagina shots. Straight. And I about lost it. I literally felt like I was about to barf because of how it was just so intrusive and so traumatic to see that on camera. And you know what I mean? And so I yell at him. I'm like, delete those. And he then pushes a button, which I now realize is just just to go back to shooting mode. But on the main screen, it just shows a blank. So he's like, I deleted them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then he proceeded to pin me down and say that every time before we had shot, he had to pet his dragon in order to, all this creepy stuff. Pinned me down, and I had a bruise on my hip because of it.
I'm sorry.
And then later on, a month later, I hadn't even after that incident, I went a few days without talking to him, and he texted me, and he's like, "Are we okay?" And I was like, I kind of felt like you betrayed me. You know what I mean? I kind of felt like I didn't even know what words to say, because I still, as a victim of sexual assault of any sort, it's natural, especially whenever you go through this, to try to put blame on yourself. It's natural. Your brain starts thinking, what did I do? Because it makes it easier. It makes it easier to take the blame than to blame somebody else, because that means that you trusted somebody that wasn't deserving of your trust, that somebody completely blindsided you. So it's easier to think, what did I do? So I didn't know even how to go about it initially of even confronting him. I just said, I felt betrayed by you. I felt, and he said to me, I did what I needed to do because if I didn't do this, somebody else would. And that was just disgusting.
Yeah.
This was around the time when the Me Too movement really started gaining momentum. And at that point, I had joined Twitter and I saw somebody that was a mutual photographer post about him and say that he had assaulted his girlfriend. And then like, oh my God, there's more than one of me. Let me come forward too.
Yeah.
And so I went to the police and I told them, and they got up in my face and asked me why I hadn't reported it sooner. And I broke down crying. They were laughing at me and stuff. It was very, I had already, like where his studio was and stuff and location to where I was. And I don't know if you know this, but a lot of times with sexual assault and stuff like that, you'll actually have to drive to the closest police station to where it happened. So that was already traumatic enough going near there.
Yeah.
I go in there. I'm already scared shitless of cops. I go in there, I say, hey, I need to report something, and they get in my face and ask why I didn't do it sooner and start yelling at me, and I start crying, and they didn't take any of the case seriously. So I'm like, fuck it. Let me just call him out on social media then, because that's the greatest tool I have at this point, since the cops don't believe me. Like, I'll do that. So I post and tag him. I didn't post on his my actual like feed or whatever, but I had like put it on his story and sent like the screenshot of his text saying he did what he had to do whenever I confronted him about pictures of my vagina being on his screen and tagged him in it. And then he had the audacity to be like, if she truly was assaulted, would she shoot like this? And
oh
like was
God. Wow.
pictures of me, you know what I mean? Pictures of me that I would have never posted, that I was never comfortable with shooting from the get-go. And he's using that as an excuse for why I wasn't assaulted by him. And I was just so traumatized because then there were people. There's always with people like this, with people that are very manipulative, that groom people and stuff like that. There's the person that you know, and then there's the person that his family sees. There's person that his friends see. And so his friends all came to his side and started calling me a slut and a whore and all this stuff.
Jesus.
And it was just so traumatizing to like put my business out there, to tell my story, to do all this, and for it to be flipped on me. It was just, and I felt like, and now in hindsight, it's very hard because you see the signs now that you realize, you know,
what
the
they
normal
are,
things.
right?
Yeah, what they are, but you don't know that, especially whenever you're coming out of this and you're in the very beginnings of deconstructing. You are very willing to trust people that say they have their best interest at heart, and it's very hard to like accept and get over.
I think like a big theme, number one, fucking sorry that shit happened. Like, that's so fucking bullshit, and it makes me mad. And what makes it even worse is the fact that like the reason that you were so gullible and naive is because of your childhood indoctrination. And what I've had to learn is to not be gullible and naive, and to even accepting that about yourself, of like, okay, the things that I've shown about myself up to this point in my life are that I trust people when they tell me this, and I fall for it. So if I can continue doing this, or I can kind of learn to think on my own and figure out a little bit of a new standard of how I get my facts, and kind of going through that process of not being naive anymore, gullible, you've kind of taken that, you've done that. And so can you speak to that, or what are some of the things that are kind of like your guide?
Before, I just want to be really clear that we are not implying that anything was Victoria's fault for being gullible, even though that is what we are saying is that like a lack of education about sexuality, a lack of exposure to the regular world, a lack of conversing about sexuality and how it works and what sexual predators are and what they look like results in people getting hurt because you're not educated on it. So it's
cool. Thank you. I'm glad you said that.
Anyway.
For sure. Yeah. What was your question, Brady?
Well, can you speak to that, kind of like, what have you been learning about how to be less naive or less gullible? What are kind of resources have you come up with?
So, a really good resource for fellow models is the shit model management list. You can type it in onto Tumblr because they made the person that created the list take it down. There was a bunch of death threats and stuff like that. But that's a really good resource. If a photographer or you reach out to a photographer, I would run it past that list. Also, checking with other people that have shot with the photographer. DMing them, asking what their experience was. The problem is with a lot of these photographers is that if they've had or caused a negative experience with another model or whoever it may be, they're not going to post that person on their feed.
Right.
So it's very hard, like as the case with my, the guy that messed with me. It's like, it's very hard to kind of do your due diligence sometimes. One thing that I've kind of put into practice is not shooting alone with them, making sure, which is so sad. And it's sad for the people that are good people, but you have to automatically assume that everybody is bad, at least initially, because otherwise you can get screwed over. So that's one thing I've kind of learned is running things past other people, checking that list, listening to the signs and being aware of the signs, you know what I mean? Getting educated on that, because if you don't know that, you're going to be prey.
And so even outside of that, even from like a more practical, like everyday thing for people who may not be models, like what I'm hearing though is you saying having conversations with people, getting to know who you're dealing with or what you're doing, not being alone, having kind of like a little bit of somebody that you can lean on to, but also that you are going to go out and figure out the world, not be scared of it at the same time.
Well, and go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, there was a lot of, in that story there was a lot of like, I felt uncomfortable, and he insisted, and I felt, and it's like, trust your body, man. I mean, we say it all the time on the show, like, trust your body when your body's saying, I don't want to do this thing. Like, don't just like, don't do it, but like find a way out of a situation if you're being coerced into doing something.
Yeah. And it really sucks that like your career and you know what I mean? Like your ability to succeed in your field had to do with that. And that's so fucking horrible.
And
yeah. And another thing that's stupid is that, as somebody that does have such like a more so public persona, at least, like whenever you come forward with this, you're subjecting yourself to a lot of backlash. And then also other photographers. But this is a thing too. I know I'm only giving advice for fellow models. I'll follow this up with like real life advice.
That's fine.
But another thing is like I've dealt with backlash from photographers too, with the standards that I now set. Like, sorry, I can't shoot alone. Sorry, there needs to be a stylist or a makeup artist, at least until I get a good feel of who you are as a person. But those type people maybe shouldn't be worked with. You know what I mean? If they're giving you backlash, you're being vulnerable with them, you're telling them your story, or at least part of it. They should be understanding of that and work with you if they really care.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to real world stuff, that's something I'm still working through, because in this instance, although, I do need to trust my body, and that's something that's very difficult for me, because with religion and stuff, it's always the opposite of that. Don't trust yourself. Don't trust your gut. It could be an inner voice that's the devil speaking to you, or it could be, 30, there's schizophrenia in my brain. You know what I mean? You got 30 voices going on. So how am I supposed to interpret every one of them? So that's very hard to distinguish. And that's something I'm still working on, is how do I feel? Because I've never been in tune with that my entire life. It's never been about me. And it's nice. It's nice to learn that, but it's something that takes time. And so in this instance, although I did feel uncomfortable with the situation, I still trusted myself, which is a mind fuck, because you're going into this thinking that you trust yourself, and then to get blindsided is just wild. And now feeling like I trust myself is scary too, because in relationships and friendships, whatever, it keeps me at an arm's length with a lot of people, because I trusted myself in other instances that ended up like this. So can I actually trust myself? And I know it's just going to take time, and I absolutely can, but it's going to be me becoming more in tune with myself, me listening to myself, and then doing little things that confirm it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
That's
That's really good advice. Little things that can. Oh, that's so good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so let's end on a slightly more positive note.
Yeah.
So you are a model, and
Yeah.
you know, I mean, you just sort of brushed over it over the last few minutes, but like you what you do now is so contrary to the way you were raised.
Totally.
And I love that about your story, because it's like you came from like such an extreme fundamentalist, like extremely like modest, forward.
Yeah.
And now I mean, like, you know, your butt's on Instagram, like,
Yeah,
you
totally.
know, and like you're like
Jesus.
you're you're okay with, I mean, like, you're comfortable with that now.
Yeah. And honestly, like, the whole thing is, and this is something that I feel like I had done, is like, it was like reclaiming that assault in a stance for me.
Right.
Like, prior, maybe old Tori wouldn't have been comfortable with that. But in order to take charge of my life, that has been really freeing for me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What was
Go
that?
ahead with your question.
No, it's fine. That's great. That's great stuff. So what did that process look like, though? I mean, like, you got into modeling. How did you become comfortable enough with your body to like sit in front of a camera and be like, oh, this is going to be on the internet, or this is going to be in a, you know, whatever.
Yeah. Honestly, you'd be surprised, but models are the most insecure people you've ever met.
Okay.
A lot of them struggle a lot more than I do. Like, it's interesting. I was just in Houston, and I talked to a few people there that were flown in for the same event. And just hearing their stories and hearing that I'm not the only one that feels isolated or has some issues is very, very nice. So what you see on social media is absolutely not the reality.
Sure.
And I know that goes without saying, but you can't hear it enough.
Fire Festival is not real.
Fire Festival.
What?
The Orange Square.
Yeah. So, so originally how I got into modeling was I had a next door neighbor while I still lived at home. That was a photographer, and she just needed somebody to practice with. And so I started doing that, and I really just had a lot of fun with it. It was nice to have a creative outlet. There was nothing really like that. We didn't have any art classes. Arts, creative direction wasn't really our focus. It was more so memorizing Bible verses and telling people they were going to burn in hell. So it was really nice to have that contrast. And so moving forward, whenever I moved up here to go to that college, same thing happened. I had a friend that was religious that still needed somebody to practice on, and I still felt that passion that I felt in front of the lens. And so it was more so, it wasn't something that I was like, yes, I'm absolutely the most stunning person ever. It wasn't like that at all. It was just something that I felt passionate about and felt like I could be myself in, and felt freeing and creative for me. And I just didn't have enough of that in my life, and I wanted to pursue it.
That's awesome.
Very cool. That is so good, because like that is such a big step for a lot of people that are coming out of fundamentalism or coming out of Christianity, because so much of that conversation is like, you should be this, you could be that, like, oh, well, this happened, so that must be God telling you to be a, you know, marine biologist or whatever, you know,
hate
whatever
your body.
bullshit. Yeah, and also hate your body. And it's like, the minute that we find that thing that we're passionate about, that we feel free doing and we feel ourselves doing, like, that was such a big part of my deconstruction, was just like being like, oh, I don't have to, like, I'm a musician, right? And it was like, I don't have to make music for God, and it doesn't have to have a message. And I'm just going to make a fucking song about how I fucking feel right now.
Yeah,
and it was like so liberating. And that was a huge turning point, you know?
Totally.
I mean, for both of us, it was like, this show was a big part of that. It was just like, let's do something that we have fun doing, that we enjoy. Right? You know, and it's like, it is so important to find something that is authentically you
absolutely.
and fits you, that is not part of an outside influence, you know?
Totally. Yeah, it's been a very big part in just freeing myself and becoming more comfortable and more in tune with myself, and just allowing myself to be who I am.
Love it.
So great.
Yeah.
That's a perfect note to end on, I feel like, because it's like a high C. with like a major chord. Thank you so much. That's so much good advice. And I love just hearing about people figuring out who they are. And like you said, Chuck, like how it's such a juxtaposition of who she was before. I think that's huge. And I love it.
It's great.
I do want to remind our listeners, go ahead.
Oh, we all have this, like, we can make our own path to being
Fleetwood Mac,
freer people.
You can go your own way. Or Big Mama Cassett. You can make your own kind of music.
Go your own way. Yeah.
That's our senior class
classic album.
With that said, I do want to remind our listeners that we have a Facebook group where it is a private group where you can deconstruct your faith. We have a Patreon where you can select a monthly amount of payment that you want to dedicate to helping us and what we're doing. And also, lastly, please get on iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe. I want to point out that we are the best reviewed podcast about deconstruction. And the way that I figure that is by if we have like the most with like the highest rating. Anyways, there's some that have like more ratings than us, but we're still like highest.
Look at us.
It's a little switchy. We have to switch things around, but I'm really proud of that, and I want to thank all of our listeners for going on there and rating, review.
Yeah, no, that really does help us out a lot. Seriously.
And, you know, we have this saying at the end of our episodes that we always say.
All the episodes. If you don't go to church, Sunday is just the second Saturday.
See you next time.
Let me unpack that for you a little bit.
Fuck being in the middle, I am no Malcolm, I ain't no Martin. More like 95 Spartans kicked out the garden. Back to back stab at God King and ask for his pardon. My mind trying to break out the margins. Writing reflections on loose leaf. Listen hard, my jargon is Darwin. Inciting infections of unbelief. Like what in the hell is a spiritual walk? But meditating on TED Talks. Elevating events that are non-stop. Circulating your views in a closed crop. Cutting verses up like a chop shop. With copies and signs like a bookshop. Pasted in like Bibles on backdrops. Feeling bad for shit on your